We'll call this is a continuation of the Business, Finance, and Audit Committee meeting that started at 9:30 this morning, and we recessed, and now we're back in session. Judy assures me I don't have to have a roll call, but welcome all to the Business, Finance, and Audit Committee meeting, and we're first going to call on President Bradley for a little introduction of today's agenda and purpose, etc.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, President Bradley.
Not quite like church. I'd like to thank Chairman Smith, and before I turn things back over to him, I just want to lay out for you how we've got things arranged to work this morning, so everyone knows what to expect. As you know, this is one of our one-day meetings for our discussion sessions where we've got an opportunity to devote time and take an in-depth look at certain topics. This format we started last year, and I think it's been very successful. This will be the third time that we have met for these discussion-only topics. Previously, we've talked about academic workforce development and retention challenges. Last time we talked about the issue of professional doctorates, and previously we talked about the role of UW colleges and also strategies for tuition and financial aid, all of them complex. We've had some productive discussions, I think, under that format, and I think that today should be no exception. As we talk about two things. First of all, budget-related items, which would be the governor's proposed budget and also the federal stimulus package. And then secondly, this afternoon, our ongoing work on equity, diversity, and inclusion. One thing is going to be different today, however, and that is that our previous information-only discussions were designed so that we wouldn't have to take any action. We wouldn't be asked to vote on anything. But this morning, we do have to take some action, and I want to just clarify what we'll be asked to do. The main focus of our discussions this morning are on the governor's recommended budget for the 2009-2011 biennium. And I want to emphasize that this is the governor's recommended budget. The governor's recommended budget is going to take some twists and turns. There will be changes as it works its way through the legislative process. We're not asking you to take any action on the budget today. We're not approving an operating budget, and we're not making any tuition decisions today. Those matters we will take up at our meeting in July. The action that we will be considering today is to approve the UW System's annual distribution adjustments for GPR and fee funds for 2009-2010. And the procedure that will follow will be the same as always, and that is that the Business, Finance, and Audit Committee will approve a resolution and then present it to the full board for our action. So, what might make this a little confusing this morning is that we have the full board sitting as constituted, though, as the Business, Finance, and Audit Committee. So, we will follow our procedural etiquette, and the Business, Finance, and Audit Committee will take up the resolution this morning and then bring it before all of us acting as a full board as part of its regular report when we formally convene at about noon after our first session. So I hope that that's enlightening. You got a little clearer focus about what we're going to do this morning, but also what we're not going to do this morning. So with that, I'll turn it over to the chairman, Regent Brent Smith. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. And we're going to go in this order as far as the discussion of the budget. We'll start out with an update on the governor's 2009-2011 budget. We'll move then to the budget distribution adjustments, and then we'll land up with a discussion of the federal stimulus package and its effect on higher education. And we'll start out with some comments from President Bradley.
Thank you. Thank you, Regent Smith. Thank you, Regent Bradley. Good morning, everybody. Before we got to the numbers, just a few other things I wanted to mention, and this is by way of reinforcing what President Bradley just said about these one-day big picture policy seminar meetings of the board. You look back at the 3 that we've had and the issues Mark mentioned. Listen to the issues, and then I want to read you a piece from our statutes. The issues we've covered in these meetings are role of the UW colleges, report of the Tuition and Financial Aid Working Group, the policy issues around tuition and financial aid, academic workforce issues and professional doctorates in the second meeting, as Mark mentioned, and now the biennial budget development and diversity, equity, and inclusion work across the system. I happen to be looking back at Chapter 36 in the statement of the purpose and mission of the university. Think about the issues that we just ticked off, Mark and I, that we've covered in these meetings, and think about the relation to this statement of purpose in Wisconsin law. The legislature finds it in the public interest to provide a system of higher education which enables students of all ages, backgrounds, and levels of income to participate in the search for knowledge and individual development, which stresses undergraduate teaching as its main priority, which offers selected professional graduate and research programs with emphasis on state and national needs, which fosters diversity of educational opportunity, which promotes service to the public, which makes efficient and effective use of human and physical resources, which functions cooperatively with other educational institutions and systems, and which promotes internal coordination and the wisest possible use of resources. That's the description of the purpose of the University of Wisconsin in state statute. And the topics we've covered, I'd submit, Mr. President, in these big picture policy discussions track very, very well with those big purposes that were laid out by our elders and betters a long time ago when they wrote Chapter 36. One other item, I just thought that those of us who have spent most of our lives in the 20th century now certainly know that the century is over with the death of John Updike, who I think was the bard of 20th century middle-class American life, a wonderful novelist, short story writer, poet, New Yorker contributor, and there were many tributes to him at his passing a couple weeks ago, one of them written by Adam Gopnik, a New Yorker colleague, and just let me quote a piece from it. Gopnik says about him, about John Updike, one has a sense of someone who, as much as, though with more wit than, Andy Warhol, has spent a good deal of his life liking things. Women's clothes, their hair, the hybridization of American accents, the way that the hyper-cold of the airline baggage compartment can be felt like a secret in the bag as you unpack. All these images and moments, recalled at random from his work, are not just reported, but quietly rhapsodized, registered with love. It is his affections that rise, and that we recall. So I hope that long after we're done grappling with the vagaries of state budgets, people will say of those of us in the room here that we worked on behalf of the University of Wisconsin, and in doing that, it was our affections that rose and that they remember about us. Now, on to numbers and budgets. In a little while, Senior Vice President Tom Andres will provide us with an analysis of the proposed 2009-11 biennial budget. As President Bradley said, this is for informational purposes only. At this still early stage of the budget-making process, you'll not be asked to take any action today on the totality of the 09-11 budget. I'll bring you a recommendation on that in July. We will focus on budget distributions, however, a little later for 09-10. But I want to take the opening opportunity today to give you what I'd characterize as the 10,000-foot overview of our budget and say a few words about what I think are the outlook for the budget, is the outlook for the budget at this moment in time. There are lots of numbers to crunch, but before I do that, let me begin by deconstructing the UW system's total all funds budget. And we can go to the next slide now, Tom. We have a $4.7 billion annual operating budget. That's a big number, and that big number leads many people to assume that the university can easily absorb huge swings in its funding. But what is inside that big number? How much flexibility or discretion do we really have with those dollars? Put another way, how much capacity does the UW system really have to absorb any kind of budget cut, and how do we begin to assess the real impact of a cut on our core operation of educating students? From that $4.7 billion annual budget you see in the top line of the slide in front of you, we can subtract about $1.1 billion in federal funds. These funds have to be used for educational opportunity grants and student loans, Pell Grants, nursing loans, work-study funding, and federally funded research and outreach conducted by our institutions. These funds are important to our students, particularly those who rely upon financial aid, but these dollars that flow through our campuses are not available to support our general operations. So you see up on the top kind of clay-colored slide, the first bullet, you subtract those federal funds from the 4.7 annual total budget because they are dedicated to specific things. We should also subtract about $500 million worth of gifts, grants, contracts, and bequests, which you see in the second bullet on the top panel, all of which come to us obviously with specific guidelines and restrictions we're obligated to honor. To be fair, we also need to subtract from that larger sum about $900 million, that's the third bullet on the top panel, $900 million worth of auxiliary receipts, money we receive from bookstores, parking lots, student unions, athletic facilities, dining halls, and other self-supporting auxiliary operations. Again, these vital resources, all very important, flow through our books but cannot be used to underwrite our core educational offerings. That leaves us with what's at the headline in the second panel, the greenish one, $2.2 billion, comprised of about $1.2 billion in state tax support or GPR and another $1 billion in tuition. However, about $330 million of that GPR, and you see that in the bullet on the green panel, is also restricted for things like debt service on our facilities and utility costs, or it's earmarked for things like the State Lab of Hygiene, other areas where the university must use it for a very specific purpose. Even in times of fiscal crisis, we cannot shift those dollars to any other educational service or program. Finally, that leaves us then with much smaller sums of money we use to go about the business of educating our 173,000 students every year. Looking only at those flexible, unencumbered dollars that support our core educational enterprise, we rely on about $860 million in GPR and $981 million in tuition, and those are the two bullets in the bottom lavender-colored panel. That adds up, those two, to about $1.8 billion. As we talk about big budget cuts to our budget in the university, that's really the base we need to focus on. That's the proper context for the discussion about how budget cuts in the next 2 years will really hit home at our 15 UW system institutions. When we talk about students and families shouldering a bigger share of their instructional costs, this is what we mean, what's on that bottom panel. When we get to that level, when we strip out all the money not related to instructing students in the classroom, we see that students today are already paying 53% of those direct costs. When we talk about taking major cuts to our GPR funding, it's coming out really of that $860 million, not the $4.7 billion. On a more positive note, the 2009-11 biennial budget proposed by Governor Doyle does provide substantial new investments in higher education. This mix of investments and cuts is already leaving people a bit confused about how our university will fare in this budget, I recognize. We're very grateful that the governor accepted our recommendation to provide a bold new investment in financial aid at a time when we recognize hardworking families all across Wisconsin need it most. This budget offers $12 million of GPR to the UW system for need-based financial aid and another $24.5 million to the Higher Education AIDS Board, HEAB. And that's terrific. These funds will allow the UW system to offset all tuition increases for resident undergraduates with documented need whose families earn up to the state's median income, $60,000 a year. That will benefit about 38,000 students and families across Wisconsin. So we hope then that this sends a strong message to Wisconsin families well up into the middle class that a UW education can be affordable for your son or daughter. Governor Doyle also invested in recruitment and retention, providing $15 million in GPR fees to help UW system hire and retain high-demand faculty and staff. There's also $18.2 million in new funding for scientific research on our campuses in the budget proposal. In today's tough international economic climate, these investments are very good news indeed. But let's remember that these are exactly the kinds of targeted, restricted, earmarked investments that I described earlier. They will not support our core educational operations in our institutional budgets. With that in mind, I'd like to address a few myths that are out there to help us all better understand the UW system's budget picture as I've laid it out for you today. Myth number one, the UW system is flat funded in this budget, and students will not be impacted. As Tom Andres will more fully explain in a few minutes, that is not the case. As I've illustrated, our budget as a whole is comprised of discrete pots of money, and increases in one pot cannot be used to offset decreases in another. Our total GPR reduction, this is the GPR portion of the reduction, of $120 million, which will come from the core of our educational operations, amounts to a 5.2% cut in GPR over the biennium. To put it in another perspective, $120 million is equal to the state share of annual instructional costs for more than 14,000 undergraduate students. In keeping with our goals laid out in the growth agenda for Wisconsin, we do not want to reduce enrollments, as other universities and colleges, as I think you've seen, are threatening to do or are actually beginning to do in other states. The cuts proposed for our institutions in this budget are real, and they are very challenging. Cuts of this magnitude will certainly impact our plans to increase enrollments, and they will hurt the education our current students receive. Myth number two, tuition can be used to fill the budget gap. Theoretically, that is true, but that ignores, I think, the real size of these cuts, the corresponding tuition increases, and the real sticker shock that would ensue. To offset the $120 million in GPR cuts alone, the UW system would need to raise tuition in the coming academic year by 17%. Believe me, nobody would be happy with that prospect. And it's not going to happen. I repeat, it's not going to happen. At a time when we've been working hard to enroll more students, when the need for more college-educated citizens has never been greater, when our argument that that is the case has taken hold all across the state with elected officials on both sides of the aisle, such a large increase in tuition would send exactly the wrong message to our families and students, and thereby worsen the state's economic prospects for coming out of this serious recession in the best shape possible. It's vital that we preserve affordable access to the UW. Later this summer, when we present the full 2010 operating budget to the board, we hope to be able to recommend a moderate, reasonable tuition increase, one that will therefore not come close to filling the budget gap as it now stands. Myth number three, the federal stimulus package will fix the program. This is the white horse riding in, or the knight riding in on the white horse to save us all. We'll have a brief conversation today about what's in the federal stimulus bill for higher education, including important financial aid provisions for our students. Very important, good news. Stimulus funds do not show up in our UW system budget in an obvious way per se, but we've been told that they fill holes elsewhere in the state budget that otherwise would have increased our cuts. In other words, without that money, our situation could have been much worse. I hope we can have some conversations in the coming weeks about using stimulus funding to make the situation better for our students' education in 09-11. Again, I don't want to make this all doom and gloom. As stated, there are some positive signs for higher education in the UW in the proposed state budget. The budget does cover the university's cost to continue, for instance, which is a big number and very, very important to have covered. As I indicated earlier, the budget does include funds for recruitment and retention, as well as provisions that would allow domestic partner benefits for all state employees, including UW's system faculty and academic staff. This is a benefit this board and the system have been arguing for over a long number of biennia. In a highly competitive environment where other colleges and universities and corporations regularly offer this benefit, this change would help the UW system hire and keep top talent. These are important signals of support for our faculty and staff. But we also do need to have that awful reality check and recognize that mixed in with these positive signs are some very real distressing challenges that everyone to varying degrees at all of our institutions must face. Let me wrap up my introductory remarks by reminding us all of the $5.7 billion context, the huge budget shortfall that's facing our state. Going into this budget process, we knew that the UW system would need to do its part to address that daunting deficit. We're very aware of and share the economic pain of the global recession, which continues, unfortunately, to deepen. The governor indicated in his budget address, for instance, that state employees, including those of us in the university, will receive no salary increases in 2009-11, while we will be asked to cover more of our health care and retirement costs. This will result in a net salary decrease for the next 2 years. Based on our early conversations with the Department of Administration, we had picked up signals that a GPR cut of about $100 million to the university might be in the works. However, that amount grew by nearly 75% in the final stages of budget development. And I'll talk more after Tom Andres is on about the 1% across the board cut that the state felt after it had tried to work all the numbers through it needed to do across all state agencies to balance the state budget, which again we are required to do in the state of Wisconsin. So after Tom provides you with a more detailed summary of the proposed 09-11 biennial budget, I want to come back then to remind us all of what's at stake and to seek your advice, seek this board's advice on how we should conduct our advocacy effort as the legislature begins its review of the proposed budget. Again, we want to use these big picture policy meetings to get advice from the board on these big picture policy issues. So I'm going to stop my initial remarks there and turn it over to Tom Andres to pick up. Tom.
Good morning. I think we're going to see today that there's a number of challenges and, to some degree, opportunities that are built into the recommended budget. We'll be highlighting those. These are sort of the topics that you're seeing here. We'll go through each one of these, which should provide the basis for our discussion today. I think one thing that sort of extends beyond what Kevin has said is that we recognize the difficulty that the governor is facing. I mean, we talk about the deficit, but there's priorities and the availability of funds. There are major issues that he is confronted with. We do recognize that. But by the same token, we've got to advocate for higher education as well. We've got to find some happy medium or balance between what we see is happening in the state and what we think are major concerns in terms of higher education. I'll go through my presentation, and then we've got three chancellors who will come up and offer a few examples that, in terms of the implications of the recommendations, that you can then kind of filter into your discussion. This is only a discussion on the operating budget, nothing on the capital budget. So the topics that we're going to be looking at, Board of Regents request versus the recommended budget, as Kevin said, cost to continue, a major component of that. The growth agenda, what are we going to be doing with that? Biennial budget reductions, maintaining affordability, recruitment and retention, research support, financial aid, statutory language changes, and that would include the domestic partner benefits. And then where do we go from here? So let's start at really the macro level. First of all, GPR, general purpose revenues. Those are funds that come from the state. We'll be looking at different sources of funds, and we'll make sure that they're defined. Full funding, at the very bottom, we'll just start really at the macro level. $196.3 million was requested by the board, and the governor recommended $91.5 million, so a difference of about $105 million. $196.3 million, $105 million, $105 million. $196.3 million, $105 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 Going from the top, and again, full funding of the cost to continue, clearly the major pieces of our budgets. $174.7 million by the governor actually exceeds what we requested. What we requested did not include, as most state agencies do, debt service increase. So if you put that on top of our 137, we're pretty close. We're pretty much on line in terms of the full funding to cost of the continued programs. And these are just taking the programs that we have right now in 709 going forward to 911. We're just taking those, moving them forward with some cost adjustments. $100 million budget reduction, we'll look at that. Financial aid program for students with family income of up to $60,000. And what we'll make sure is we give you the context for that as well. That's a $12,000 increase, a $12 million increase, a 1% across the board cut. Our share of that, and this is across all state agencies, is $20.4 million. Research initiatives, we requested $15.3 million as part of the growth agenda. And what we received was 10.2, but they're very different sets of initiatives in terms of the request and the governor's recommended. Recruitment or retention, $15 million requested, $15 million supported. And then finally, other growth agenda items, $29 million requested, 0 in terms of the governor's recommended. So there you see sort of the big picture, $105 million. You know, what jumps out at me in terms of maybe the key point here is that we're getting $174.7 million to continue our current programs, but we're then seeing $120.4. You take the $100 million and the $20.4 million, $120.4 million being taken away. That provides us with a little over $54 million to cover what I think we all agree is about $174.7 million to do our current operations. Now, I think another way of looking at that is we're $120 million short of meeting our cost to continue programs. And campuses, as you'll see today, are going to be getting this information and being told where they can, in terms of the allocation processes, they have to take that information back to their campuses and begin to move it through their planning processes. And most of them have been doing that already. But where they have to come in is they have to look at what that implies relative to the balance that they're looking for access, affordability, quality, and so forth. Next item is the growth agenda. Where are we going with that? Where are we going to go with enrollment? Where are we going to go with research growth? Expectations and limitations are going to be really on a campus-by-campus basis. Everybody is in a different place as far as what their priorities are, what their funding. I mean, everybody is looking at the growth agenda as a component. But as we will see here, bottom point, there is no new funding relative to the growth agenda. So pretty problematic as to where you could take it beyond where we are now. But at the same time, we've got initiatives that are built into this biennium's budget, and they're moving forward this biennium. But we just can't see any way that that won't be slowed down. But again, part of what we're going to be doing between now and when we come back to you in July with the budget is say, here's the things that we can do. Here's the direction that we're going to go. Okay, what are the budget reductions? How much? We've already talked about the $120.4 million. That's part of the state funding reduction. Other funds, $53.6 million. Now, I think a good point here to make is that as we are right now talking with the governor's office about the potential exclusion of some of the fund sources that are included in that. And as we move through that $174 million should be reduced at some level. And again, we're having a really positive discussion on that. I think as suggested by President Riley, the reductions are largely focused on GPR funds. So we can't go around and allocate cuts across restricted funds. If you go back through his sort of levels of funding, we can't take reductions and put them over into federal funds. And we certainly can't do it to any great degree now in terms of many of the other fund sources beyond GPR, particularly the auxiliary services, as we'll talk a little more about. So the reductions in program revenue, the $53.6 million, will impact to a great degree the operations of the auxiliary services. Now, these are residence halls, they're dining halls, There's student supported, this program revenue. This is funding that comes as a user charge, comes to the campus, and it's directly related to the services that are being provided by the campus for the students. The students are paying for it. It's self-supporting, there's no state funds, and they rely on maintaining dollars in terms of reserves and funding to be able to plan beyond 1 year, to be able to look down the road and say, we're going to build a building, we've got debt service, we're going to do renovations. And we'll talk about that a little bit more shortly. So as we look at this and we break it down one more level, you'll see that again, we talked about the $100 million in GPR. That's just across the higher education, 1% across the board. Kind of further define that other program information, $28.6 million, specifically 1% across the board. It's program revenue. But then there's the additional $25 million that's being taken out of our auxiliary balances. And again, we're talking about sort of doubling up on the auxiliaries at the 28.6. There's a good chunk of that, and then another $25 million out of their cash balances. So again, not to belabor the point, as we look at the auxiliary funds, it's really important to know these funds are going to, HEAB is the Higher Education Aids Board, and that's to support Wisconsin higher education grants, in case that wasn't clear. Funding is being transferred into the Higher Education Aids Board. Very, very positive step relative to increasing access, increasing affordability, and moving forward with the initiative that we'll look to next. But it's coming from what effectively is student support services. So that's one of the dilemmas that we've got. What about maintaining affordability? As we talk about this transitioning into the again what was discussed already about the availability of funds, so that now students who are making less than $60,000 a year exhibit financial need, no tuition increases, and they're going to be held harmless. And we think, given the economic times right now, there's probably not a better sort of an option or initiative that we could do. Now, it includes all Pell-eligible students, which means people who are looking at financial aid. They go through a financial aid needs analysis, and what comes out of that is a statement that they have a level of need. We won't be covering the full need, but they will support the full tuition increase. Funding support, as mentioned, it's actually $24.5 million. We're sort of caught in between. Coming from the auxiliary services into the grant program. To fully fund that, it takes an additional $12 million, which I mentioned earlier, under the GPR. So you're looking at a $36 million infusion into the higher ed board to make sure that we can move forward with this program. And again, as Kevin mentioned, there's going to be other increases coming about at the federal level. We've got Pell Grant increases, and we also have an increase in the American Opportunity Tax Credit, used to be the Hope Credit. So there's a number of positive features on the access side. Talked about $15 million in recruitment and retention. That's to retain instructional faculty, instructional research, and academic staff in high demand areas. It's important to note here, we requested $15 million, we got $15 million, and I think the board might remember, this is an expanded definition. We're looking at instructional academic staff as well, and that had not been the case up until this year. One other point, the board did approve a pay plan. I think everybody is aware of that. The governor did not fund that pay plan. Research support, $18.2 million. Research support, as stated here, Wisconsin Institutes for Discovery, that's $8.2 million. Bioenergy initiatives, $8 million. Genomics initiative, $2 million. Probably important to note, too, that we had other requests as part of the growth agenda on research. $10 million related to Milwaukee expanded research projects, support for their new school for public health and school for freshwater sciences, not supported. And also, Madison had $5.2 million that they were looking at support for their trying to retain and attract the best graduate students to help develop their research knowledge base. Financial aid, next up. $14.3 million. Again, it goes back to that $12 million. It's kind of a steady thread here. $12 million that we talked about in GPR, that we've talked about as it relates to the new access or affordability program. $2.3 million for the Advanced Opportunity Program and the Lawton Grant Program. And again, the $24 million coming in to the Higher Education AIDS Board for, again, the new assistance program for 60,000 and under. Statutory language changes, quite a few. Tuition for undocumented persons, there is now a specific set of eligibility requirements. Domestic partner benefits, providing support on retirement and health care benefits. Collective bargaining provisions, faculty, academic staff can now seek to bargain if they so choose for salaries, wages, conditions. Retaining funds from the sale of lands, these are program revenue-related lands donated. As mentioned, the ability to create schools of public health, freshwater sciences at Milwaukee, and also the veterans remission requirements were changed to kind of expand the opportunity in terms of funds available. So that was rather quick, and I apologize for being so quick, but we can then kind of move into the discussions that are really most important, and that's where you're going to be talking to each other. Next steps, where do we go from here? Assessing implications of funding reductions. Campuses have been doing that for the last month, 2 months right now. And today they're going to get a little more information as to how they can move forward with some specific numbers. I think, again, as Kevin had mentioned, advocacy planning to address the budget. That's going to be part of the discussion at the end of the full 2009 biennial review today. Identifying programs and services to be reduced. Again, part of the planning process is what do you do? What are your goals? What are your objectives? As we're looking at budget reductions, what are the priorities? So you're looking at program and service reductions potentially and identifying additional resources to continue key and necessary program and services. Where we go from here, next 2 or 3 months, the campuses are working through the issues, creating their budgets to bring forward to you the 2010 budget for board action in July. With that, I'd like to now introduce, we'll move into we'll have the 3 chancellors step up. First will be Chancellor Martin. That would then be followed by Chancellor Gao and then Chancellor Wilson.
Where you'll be.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak about the impact of the proposed budget. Let me begin by saying, honestly, I don't know what the impact of the proposed budget will be. We don't yet know to what extent the proposed cuts will be offset by tuition, and we don't understand. When I say we, I speak for the Madison campus. We don't fully understand the implications of the 1% cut on all funds, so it's really not possible for me to say precisely what the impact of the budget proposal will be. With respect to any possible tuition increase, I want to emphasize how significant it is that the governor has made a commitment to hold harmless those students with need from families making $60,000 or less. And with regard to the 1% cut on all funds, let me also say that I look forward to working with the system, the governor's office, and the legislature to consider what can be done about the worst possible implications of that cut. I believe that the consequences that have been discussed in the media and elsewhere are unintended consequences, and so I look forward to working to see what we can do to move through some of those. Given the governor's very long and strong history of supporting public-private partnerships, it's not conceivable to me that the intended consequence was cutting or freezing gift funds. Without a tuition offset and without modifications in the 1% on all funds, the impact on Madison could potentially be transformative in a negative sense. But what I want to reiterate is that I do not expect that that will be the ultimate outcome. In addition to the magnitude of state cuts, we faced in Madison significant problems with our other major funding sources. As I'm sure all of you know, endowments at the UW Foundation and at the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation have taken a significant hit. Sources of faculty research money and graduate student funding, such as the Vilas Foundation funding, the Hildale funding, are also down significantly. So we face a perfect storm of problems with our various revenue sources. In the absence of really clear information about what we'll ultimately face, I've asked the deans to try and model a 5% base reduction. This may be an overstatement, I hope, of what the conditions will be in the end. It could be an understatement, but that's what we've asked them to model. What will a 5% base reduction mean? The deans have given preliminary answers to that question, and I'll share some examples with you, since that's what I was asked to do here. First, let me say that I believe Madison has about 61% of the total program revenue for the system, which means that the cut in program revenue that would be part of this 1% cut on all funds would affect student support services at Madison very, very significantly. On to the 5% base reduction, were that to come to pass. If we're not able to prevent it, but I will do everything in my power, as will all the deans, to prevent it, there could be a decrease in the amount of financial aid we have available to our students. Madison is already $20 million short of meeting the full demonstrated financial need of our students. $20 million a year short of meeting the full financial need of students with demonstrated need. I don't believe, no matter what happens, that we will actually cut financial aid, and in fact, I promise to come up with my own strategies on the Madison campus to increase significantly our financial aid pot. But in every college, it would mean, inevitably, cuts in faculty lines, in academic staff, and in graduate funding. And why is that the case? Well, because the great majority of our funding from the state pays for salaries and benefits. And because the history of budget cuts over the past 10 to 15 years in the university system has meant that there's very little else that we can cut. So what would it mean if we had to cut faculty lines, academic staff, and graduate funding by this amount? Let me give you an example of letters and sciences. This might surprise some of you, but 80% of the budget of the College of Letters and Sciences, which is by far our largest college and the one which educates all of our undergraduate students, 80% of that total budget is instructional. 80%. Over the past 5 to 10 years, Letters and Science has lost 66 faculty lines. To lose even more faculty lines in Letters and Sciences would mean a reduction in majors available to students, a reduction in courses available to students. And let me just mention some of the areas that the Dean of Letters and Sciences has mentioned as areas that would have to reduce the numbers of students who could major in them. Economics, chemistry, biology, and Spanish. Those are 4 of the areas that would have to restrict the number of majors. We already have extraordinary demand in all of those areas, and I think we would all agree, given our world and our state, that they couldn't be 4 more important areas in which to educate all the students who wish to be educated in those areas. There could be a reduction in undergraduate admissions in some colleges, at least one, if we took this 5% base reduction. Nursing, for example, would have to reduce admissions by 15 students immediately, this at a time when the nursing shortage in the state and in the nation has already hit alarming rates. The engineering college would eliminate 1 major entirely if they were required to assume a 5% base reduction. There would be enrollment caps on gateway courses or prerequisite courses, making it harder for students to get their degrees on time. For example, the medical school predicts it would have to drastically cut back enrollments in its physiology course. That physiology course is a prerequisite for all biology majors. That would mean biology majors would take significantly longer to graduate with their major. Letters and Sciences says it would have to cut in half the availability of the general education requirement in communication arts, another course which would then take students longer to get their requirements taken care of. Some deans have said they would have to eliminate or reduce significantly some of their best internship and field-based learning opportunities, which I consider to be some of the most innovative examples of undergraduate education and really ought not to be considered superfluous. Let me say again, all of that is based on the notion that we would take a cut of a size that I believe we will not take. I'm an eternal optimist in the group. The impact on research, which is also always an impact on students. If we really had to reduce the size of the faculty by up to 5%, that would translate into about a $20 million drop in annual research dollars. Why do I say that? It's based on the fact that our faculty at Madison bring in an average every year of each one of them $233,880. $233,880 a faculty member per year in research funds. That would be the lesser amount. The lesser amount would be $20 million overall. A reduction in the number and quality of graduate students would mean fewer discussion sections for students, but also a hit on the quality and amount of research in our labs. That would add then potentially to the $20 million drop in annual research dollars. It's also the case that GPR cuts on our staff in the research and sponsored programs could mean greater difficulty processing grants, getting grants through, managing them, and ensuring compliance with federal regulations. They could also make it harder to take advantage of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. If we look at our historical success rates in competing for grant money at the federal level, Madison could expect $143 million from that act. But a 5% loss in our capacity to get and process those grants would mean $7 million less than that. Please remember, again, these are rough estimates based on an expectation that I don't hold to. What would the potential reduction in faculty and research mean for the state of Wisconsin? As you know, research dollars have a strong multiplier effect and drive growth in the economy of this state and others. In June 2008, a report using NIH data stated that the multiplier effect of research funding on our campus is estimated to be about 2.13. So were we to lose $20+ million in foregone grants, that would mean a loss of $53 million approximately for the Wisconsin economy. And this doesn't include the impact on our faculty's ability to patent their inventions and commercialize their intellectual property and stimulate the state's economy in that way. Finally, as I mentioned, the market crash has significantly reduced the endowment base at the foundations that are so critical to our success, to making Madison what is a world-class research university, highly regarded all over the world for our research productivity and educational quality. And for that reason, we need every single dollar that our alums and supporters have provided to help students with access and affordability and to ensure the quality of this great research university. For that reason, taking or freezing private gift money would have a chilling effect on our future ability to raise supplemental funds in the private sector, and would also break faith with those alums and supporters who have given to us so generously over time. If the funds or our authority to spend those funds are left in place, which I believe, I hope they will be, and I choose also to believe it, but we're required to take the equivalent amount of a cut in GPR funds, it will still make the ultimate effect of our private dollars zero. And it will significantly increase the percent cut that we have to assess across our campus in GPR dollars. As I said at the beginning, I don't believe that this will have been the governor's intent. As I said before, given the history of his support for public-private partnerships, this would be inconsistent with it. I don't believe the legislature will want to put a damper on the generosity of our alumni and friends, or on the university faculty's and students' entrepreneurial efforts to help ourselves in the face of the enormous pressures on state governments. I look forward, as I said, to working with everyone to clarify what will really occur and to advocate for the Madison campus and the system as a whole. I think the value to our students in their education while they're getting it and the value of a Madison degree over a lifetime is much too important to have significantly damaged. Even as we accept our responsibility, as Kevin said, to absorb the pain that no pay plan, that some cut no matter what happens, and that other forms of responsibility will force us to take. Let us take our share of the pain, but let us not undermine the extraordinary quality of a UW-Madison or a UW system degree. Thank you.
I think we have two other chancellors we'd like to have say a few words about the effects of the budget as proposed on their campus if it was to play out that way. And Chancellor Gao, next.
Thank you for this opportunity. It feels a little unusual to talk about my own campus because it's just one in a very large system. So I'm going to try to say some things I think that will have broad relevance. And I'll begin by just relating a story. Yesterday, Regent Thomas hosted a very helpful and I think stimulating session of student leaders from all the campuses and chancellors and other system officials. And it was great because we had an opportunity to talk to some people we don't normally talk to. And I sat at a table with a student leader from UW-Richland. And I said, why did you choose Richland? And he said, well, my brother went there. And now my brother is pursuing his doctorate at St. Louis University. My brother said to me, there's a professor at Richland who's the best I've ever had, and you need to go there and study with him. And so that reminds you of what this is all about, that transformative power of what we do. And David's been saying about his faculty. I wish I had the name for you because that person really should get some accolades, and maybe we can track that down. So I hope we keep that in mind as we talk about this. We knew that there would be the $100 million cut. I think that was no great surprise with the economy the way it is, and there are people here in Madison that are very experienced at these things, and we got word, and so we began planning on our campus for something in the range of $5 to $6 million. What would we do? And it wasn't really a drill. This was something we've been taking quite seriously. And so you do the things that I think we all do. You look at budgets and say, are there things we can do without? And it's not things you'll want to do, but in our case, we're going to dramatically reduce scholarly travel. Hopefully, we can do this 1 year and bring it back, but that's something we'll look at. Also, we have a benefit for our employees if they want to get advanced degrees. We help them with their tuition. We're not going to be able to do that anymore. We have a faculty computer replacement fund. There, too, we will have to zero that out and not do that. But, you know, those things only take you so far. 82% of the budget is compensation of people. And so then you've got to begin looking at positions. And then another common technique are vacancies that people retire and leave the university. Can we leave those unfilled? In our case, it's a bit unusual because we've had a historically very high student-faculty ratio. And you may recall we've made a commitment to our growth, quality, and access agenda to grow the faculty, and we're actually charging our newer students more to do that. So we have a moral obligation not to cut faculty, which is highly unusual, and actually we're getting a lot of pressure from the non-faculty. Well, why are we going to have to suffer the most? And I have to point out that, you know, I personally wrote a letter to the parents saying this is why tuition is rising, and this is, you're going to get more teachers. So you start looking at all those staff areas, and some people have left the university. We've been able to reassign the responsibilities, collapse some jobs, put in, you know, and that will save some money. But ultimately, there is no way to cut this size amount out of your budget without letting some people go. And that is something that I can tell you, I think my colleagues would agree, is not our favorite part of the job. But these are the new realities, and so we'll have to take a real hard look at are there things that we've been doing that we no longer need to do. So this was a struggle just with the $100 million. I will never forget the Monday before the governor's budget address, on our conference call, we learned that there was also a 1% reduction and that's $49 million. And that really is pretty devastating. And then I will equally not forget walking up to the Capitol and getting your email on my Trio and seeing, oh, and there's also a $25 million reduction in program revenue. I mean, this gets, so our number now is $11 million, and everybody else has the same story where you just watched it grow. And what are you going to do on that? Now, the program revenue piece is interesting for our campus because we are taking a very large hit on that because we've been saving some money. And I'll put the elephant in the room in front of us all. I've been asked, do we think that's fair? And what I tell people, and a lot of people ask me, imagine on the campus, I say, no, it's not fair for any of us. I mean, this is a bad situation, and perhaps lacrosse can be the sort of glaring example of the drawbacks to transferring these program revenue funds. These monies are used for things that are not terribly glamorous, but they are essential, and you have to remember these are self-sustaining operations. Everybody's always saying, be entrepreneurial, and that's what we've been doing. And when you've got roofs that are deteriorating on your res halls, you've got plumbing that is falling apart in your dining hall, you got a dishwasher that breaks down, you need to update your fire alarms in your residence halls, you've got to pay for all that. And rather than just raise fees dramatically on our resident students and our dining hall people, we've been looking at that, amortizing it over a long term. We also have a new residence hall project that we wanted to make sure we had a very large multi-million-dollar down payment so that the debt service on that is reduced. And again, student fees are held in check. So really, the way we've been managing those PR funds is to keep costs down for students. If they are utilized for financial aid or other things, that's a very worthwhile goal, but it will still create a problem in that we will have to find a way to get the monies to make the needed repairs on our facilities. And you were with us in December, and that was a proud moment for us. I think, the building we were in, Cartwright Center, you can see that's not a, very glamorous student center, but that's what we have, and we're trying to get as much out of that as we can. Now, the other day, a reporter asked me, well, why don't you get out of those businesses? And I said, well, that's interesting. I thought of that old quote from James Garfield that the ideal university was Mark Hopkins on one end of a log and the student on the other. And Mark Hopkins was his president at Williams College, and and I thought, okay, the personal part, we believe in that. But I think we need more than the log, right? And we've got 3,100 students who live on our campus, and that's out of a population of a little over 9,000, so it's very significant. And I know other campuses, it's the same way. It's kind of a little community, village, city. I mean, here in Madison, it's a city, and you've got to keep it up. And I said, but if we lost that, I think students would not want to come here, and this is something that is very important to them. Matter of fact, if we went over to the dining hall, and I try to do that on a fairly regular basis, you'll see people not only eating there, but they're also talking about their work and collaborating on projects, and it's wonderful. The faculty and staff and students socialize together and talk about ideas and carry on those conversations. The res halls, I'm visiting all 11 halls this year. I take a tour, and they tell them the chancellor's coming from 6 to 8, and if you want to meet him, have your door open and, be dressed okay. And, although not everybody listens to that. And I walk around and, see people, and okay, there's some video games, and actually the Guitar Hero thing is kind of right up my alley, and there are photos of that, the chancellor playing. But really, seriously, 9 out of 10 times I come in and they are working on their academic work. And you've got people doing, biology. There was a woman, calculus 3. I said, better you than me. I made it to 2, and that was enough. But and they're collaborating together, and they're studying together. And so those residence halls are very important to the fabric of what we do. And as a matter of fact, you can do yourself a favor. I mean, we get all bogged down in this can be very depressing. when I go in there and start talking to students, in no time that lifts. And I feel an incredible optimism because these students are the future, and that energy and creativity is what will bring us out of this current situation. And so that's why the things that President Riley has been saying for some time are just very, very true. We cannot undercut what we're doing because it is vital to the future of the state and the country. And so I will end by saying another story. I'm kind of a storyteller, but I got up the other morning and got my New York Times, and you probably did this too, and I scanned through it very quickly, and I saw an article about humanities in hard times, and I started to read the story, and it said, at elite universities like Yale and great liberal arts colleges like Lewis and Clark, and big important systems like Wisconsin. And I just thought that is pretty special, that we are the exemplar of the state system. We are one of the leaders. And so we really can't lose that in this budget situation. And I know I hate to be depressing, but if this is what it's like in this biennium, when you look out into the next, that gets really scary. So I am here to say, on behalf of over 10,000 students, staff, and faculty at UW-La Crosse, we are ready to tell the story about this impact, and we will do that not only to protect what we've built on our campus, but also to keep this great system as strong as it can be. So thank you for the opportunity to talk with you.
Thank you, Joe. We'll have one more chancellor say a few words, Chancellor David Wilson of Colleges and Extension, and then I'll conclude and we'll open it up for a general discussion with the board.
David.
Morning. Thank you very much, President Riley, Regent President Bradley, Regent Smith, and others for inviting me here to take a few minutes this morning to share with you how the proposed budget cuts would affect UW Extension and the UW colleges. But first, just a little context. In late 2005, this Board of Regents made a bold decision, a decision to integrate the central administrative operations of the UW colleges and UW Extension, and to recruit one chancellor to lead these two institutions. That decision was made with two primary goals in mind. One was to increase efficiencies, and the other was to provide greater access for hundreds of thousands of Wisconsin citizens to our degree programs, our evidence-based extension service, and our nationally revered public broadcasting programs. So for the last 3 years, we have been engaged in an ongoing process to make our institutions more efficient. Let me just share one of these significant efficiencies with you. By having one chancellor lead these two institutions instead of two, by having one chief information technology officer leading the central IT unit for the UW colleges and UW Extension instead of two, by having one executive director for university relations leading our communications efforts of the two institutions instead of two, we are not spending approximately $650,000 in annual salary, benefits, and expenses for these specific administrative positions. So with this in mind, the new proposed budget cuts can have a tremendously severe and debilitating effect on us, especially since I believe that we are already quite efficient in the way we carry out our work. Our institutions operate at what we like to call the grassroots level. We are embedded in the small towns and communities all over the state, carrying out the Wisconsin idea every day. In these difficult economic times, our faculty and staff are working day in and day out with scores of individuals, families, and communities who have been affected by this global economic downturn. 2 days ago, for example, I was in Winnebago County, where our extension faculty has provided the leadership to open the first countywide food pantry. The pantry has been open for only a short while, 4 weekends to be exact, but it has already served in those 4 weekends over 800 households and more than 1,200 adults, many of whom have lost their jobs and are seeking all the help they can to eke out a living. Our faculty across the colleges, from UW Sheboygan to UW Richland, and from UW Rock County in Janesville to UW Marathon County in Wausau, are seeing dislocated workers now populate our classrooms. These individuals are coming back to school because they understand that while this recession is affecting everyone, it certainly is falling especially hard on the shoulders of those without a 4-year degree. They understand that education is now the best preparation for the future, no matter how uncertain right now that future may appear to be. The point in sharing all of this with you is that UW Extension and the UW College's faculty and staff are not disconnected from the harsh economic realities facing our state. In fact, we are out there helping people pull their lives back together by preventing foreclosures on their homes and by showing them how to enter our institutions to study for a degree. Therefore, the proposed budget cuts would limit our efforts to continue offering some of the services that I'm speaking about. First, the proposed cuts would slow down tremendously the momentum that we have gained with our adult student initiative, which enables the UW colleges and UW Extension to create new programs to better meet the needs of adult and non-traditional students. Already, in just 2 years, we are seeing impressive results from our efforts to enroll more adults into baccalaureate degree programs across the UW institution. Over the last 2 years, we have enrolled nearly 1,300 new adult students in our degree programs. At the UW colleges, we now offer our blended face-to-face and online courses in accelerated 5- and 7-week formats at 8 of our 13 campuses. These new accelerated courses have been incredibly successful with busy adults. These courses fill up easily and enjoy high retention rates of students throughout the semester. And our UW Extension Division of Continuing Education, Outreach, and E-Learning, in collaboration with our comprehensive campuses, has been quite busy developing new baccalaureate degree completion programs in such areas as sustainable management and STEM education for teachers. The impending budget cuts would certainly slow our ability to expand the accelerated hybrid courses across the state, slow our ability to develop new baccalaureate degree completion programs, and cut back on our ability to deliver services that busy adults and parents need to help them start, continue, or complete a baccalaureate degree. Let me now turn to the governor's proposal that 1% of revenues come from non-federal sources and that they be turned back to the state. I need to give you a couple of brief examples of how devastating this proposal could be for UW Extension endeavors. Our Division of Cooperative Extension, which has offices in 72 counties and on 3 tribal nations, delivers programs and services all over the state. We get 40% of the share of the cost of these county-based programs from the general support of local county budgets. On an annual basis, those 72 counties are sending us $20 million a year. Now, let me offer a perspective to this this 1% cut that I'm now hearing as I travel around the state from several of the local county board members, and understand that I'm presenting this to you from their perspective, if you will. So I want you to imagine for a moment that you are a retired farmer or a small business owner or a local community leader, as many of these local county board members are. And you have invested your life's work and your life's passion into your community and into your county. And you now sit on that county board, which allocates funds to from taxpayers to the local UW Extension office. In our rural areas, and indeed in many of our urban areas where wages are not typically high, these are very hard-earned dollars. And as a county board member, you just found out that 1% of those local dollars that your county board has allocated to UW Extension might go out of your county to support the state's operations. This is what I'm hearing from many of those local county board members in terms of the way they are perceiving the 1%. I'm also hearing something similar from our donors to public broadcasting. So in another scenario, imagine that you are a donor to Wisconsin Public Television or Wisconsin Public Radio, which of course are part of UW Extension's Division of Broadcasting and Media Innovation. And the dollars that you have available for charitable giving in this climate are declining. And so you want to make sure that your donations, if you will get a bang for their buck. You too have just learned that possibly 1% of your donations intended for public broadcasting, whose mission that you ardently believe in, might not necessarily go in that direction. Public broadcasting is raising about $10 million a year, and that is nearly half of its operating budget. So it's easy to see the possible prospective chilling effect that this could have both in terms of our prospective donors to radio and television, as well as maintaining the effective county-based partnerships that we have with cooperative extension. Another part of the budget reduction proposal calls for an auxiliary fund transfer, as you've heard from numerous speakers. Auxiliary funds are held by various UW entities as, quote-unquote, a savings account for capital improvements. And UW Extension is slated to give back nearly $2 million of these funds. The proposed auxiliary giveback from university accounts would certainly deprive the Powell Center, which is the hub of technology to support learning at a distance, of approximately $1 million of reserves that are urgently needed for technology and services upgrade to a revenue-generating unit that serves more than 85,000 clients each year. And so, at a time of tight budgets that curtail travel to on-site education, we believe that the Powell Center is an exceptionally cost-effective way to provide these educational services via distant technologies. And certainly this would impair our ability to provide the kind of upgrades to that facility to allow it to continue to do that. And so in closing, let me simply reiterate that we in UW Extension and the UW colleges understand the current plight of families and the current plight of communities in this state. And we know that during these very difficult economic times, all of us will have to sacrifice. And we are prepared to do that. What we are saying here this morning simply is that we think the long-term consequences of the 1% give back in particular and the auxiliary transfer could for us be very risky for the long-term stability of our institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor Wilson. Thank you, Chancellor Gao. Thank you, Chancellor Martin. I'm just about ready to turn this discussion over, Mr. Chair, to you and the board to hear Regents' reactions, questions, and advice about how we take up our advocacy now for the university in this budget cycle. You can hardly turn on the radio or pick up a newspaper, as Joe said, in the morning and not hear about another company that's in serious trouble, another entity that's laying off or furloughing large numbers of people, another family that's lost significant amounts of money. And that's what we're trying to focus on as we think about what the University of Wisconsin needs to do for the future of the people of Wisconsin. It's not about the university, it's about our mission for the future. It's about the growth agenda that you have all supported so strongly and that we need to get on with in order to have this state positioned where it needs to be in the future to be competitive. As we come out of this recession, and we will, it's going to take a while from any of the indicators which we can read out there now, but we will come out, and we want to, in the meantime, use the University of Wisconsin wisely to position the state and our families and our young people in as strong a position as they can be coming out of that recession. There is some good news here that I wanted to put on the table before I opened it up for discussion. That is, as I understand what happened here, as the governor and the state and DOA budget folks were putting their budget together, and they got to the end and realized that the economy had gotten dire enough that they would have to impose this 1% across-the-board cut to make the books balance. They said they would do it on everything initially but federal revenues and all the agencies, but it would be across the board. As we've looked at that and had good conversations with folks in DOA and Division of the Budget, we've made the point that our budget looks different from almost every other state agency. 3/4 of it is non-state dollars, 1/4 of the budget. So when you talk about an across-the-board cut, our board is a lot wider than most of those other agencies. And it includes things like gifts, grants, trust funds, which legally we can't take money out of. And in terms of our public relations, as a number of the chancellors have suggested, we would be very foolish to say we would take money out of and move over into a state account. The folks that we're talking to understand that problem, and I'll tell you that I had a conversation just this morning early with the Secretary Michael Morgan of the Department of Administration, and he wanted us to know today that the state has no intent to take dollars out of gift funds and insist that they be given back into a state account for the purpose of balancing the budget. We have a number of other accounts that we want to continue to talk to the state about as we go forward, that we think it doesn't make any sense to take those monies out of. And, again, when we were looking at a $100 million cut that would be our pain, we were ready, we thought, to absorb that. When this 1% kind of came on the board at the last minute, admittedly for everybody, that was a shock when we realized that would cost us $50 million more in cuts on top of the $100 million we expected were coming. So as we open this up for discussion, questions, and a look at your advice on our advocacy strategy, one of the particular items I'd suggest we get to is, can we, with your good advice, continue to focus on the base for that 1% cut and narrow it back down to something that is more reasonable based on the actual number, but also on the way our budget is put together, given that we have 3/4 of our budget that is non-state funding. We, again, have had good discussions about doing that with the state. I think there is some support for us to do that from the state now. I think part of our goal with your advice will be how we go back and talk about that and other things you think we ought to be talking about in our advocacy period. So I'm going to conclude this by putting 3 questions on the table. What's our message after today about the UW and the budget process? Who are the best messengers, people to send that message, whatever we decide it should be? And then in terms of how we craft the message, do we want to continue to focus on narrowing the base of that 1% across-the-board cut? With that, Mr. Chair, I'll stop and turn it back over to you and the board members.
Thank you, President Riley. We'll have a general discussion now. Following that general discussion, we'll go back to Tom for a discussion of the resolution that's going to be in front of us and the materials in our packet 1-2E, and a discussion of the federal stimulus. But right now, we'll have a general discussion with the focus of President Riley's 3 questions, and we'll go around the table. Anybody on this side of the table have comments, questions? Regent Conley-Kiesler.
I just need to go back just to clarify some things in my head on this budget. The $29 million that we had in our budget for growth initiatives or growth, was that new dollars we put in the budget? So there's $30 million there that would be new. I know you don't want to hear me say don't put that in, because I know you all want those new dollars. But I'm just trying to get my arms around if cuts have to come and we're looking at that budget. Is that 30 million new? Yes.
Yes, there's new money we asked for to do the new growth agenda initiatives that are not there. We're not funded in the budget proposal. And we're, again, the important point there, Regent Conley-Kiesler, I think, is we're now struggling to figure out how do we keep the growth agenda momentum going.
I recognize
given
that.
Yeah.
And is it $6 million for every 1% increase in tuition?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I had stimulus. We're going to talk about
We're going to talk about stimulus. We're going to come back to stimulus, yeah.
All right.
Anybody else on this side of the table? Jeff, Regent Bartel.
Let me just make sure I understand something. I certainly would not question the governor's acceptance of our recommendation with respect to the recruitment and retention fund. Which, do we have a name for that? Is that STAR Fund or?
No, recruitment and retention fund is.
So and that's for the purpose of recruiting and retaining faculty, and it's a very important fund indeed. But I'm very distressed at some of the things that the chancellors have described in the worst-case situation. And I wonder, has any thought been given to that fund as a source of just perhaps compromising some of the losses that would occur in other places?
Anybody want to tackle that?
Other places such as?
Such as the auxiliary funds that, for financial needs or...
Well, what I can tell you is that when we got the recruitment and retention monies in the last biennium, we had to submit a plan to the Secretary of the Department of Administration about how we would distribute those funds, and he had to approve that plan before we could indeed distribute any of the monies. He has told me again that that is his expectation, that we would submit a plan to him about how they would be used, and he would have to approve that plan. So any thought we might have about using that fund in other ways, which we haven't talked about, to answer your question simply yet at this point, would have to be a conversation directly around his approval authority for those monies.
Okay. Regent Feldman and then Regent Davis. Go ahead.
Could we talk a little bit more about the auxiliary funds? Where did they come from, the auxiliary balances? Where did they come from? What have we been doing with them in the past? What's their purpose, and how do we arrive at the amount of reserve funds we would need at each campus?
Tom, you want to?
Tom was going to talk about that in connection with the distribution, but let's go there now in that more general way that you asked, because I think that's a question that's on a lot of people's minds.
Sure.
Tom.
Yeah, I mean, every campus is different in terms of balances, where those balances are generated from. I mean, the cash comes from, you could have a dining hall in one area or a residence hall where they're generating cash so that they can be making renovations, doing something differently within that area. Others make a completely different emphasis. So the actual balances will vary in amount and also in terms of the usage.
And in time, Tom, right? I mean, you could come in on a Monday in March and find a big balance at one institution and come back on a Monday in April and find a much smaller balance depending on the inflow and outflow of cash into those accounts.
I mean, the issue that we're dealing with right now in auxiliaries, other than, I mean, it's a $25 million reduction, we know that. The issue really is that it varies greatly. The balances vary greatly at each campus. And it depends on their planning. It depends on if they're looking at putting a facility on in 2 years, a parking garage, and that's going to be, they're sort of forward supporting that funding and building into it. That's going to be a more of a demand than another campus that isn't doing that kind. They may just be doing a renovation of a particular facility that's significantly less. So there's one of the things that we see, and I don't know if we should go into the auxiliary issue or...
Sure. We're on it. Why don't we? It seems like there's going to be other questions. So, Tom, why don't you give some the methodology?
Okay.
Let's do it right now. So
yeah,
it's going to be
the question that has been raised, generally speaking, is there's a $25 million reduction in the auxiliaries. The question is, how is that determined? How do we allocate that by campus? And I think a little bit of background is that as we look at the direction that's been taken in the recommendation, we do not support it. We do not think that it makes sense within the context of how these self-supporting entities exist. We go back to what I said earlier. It's self-supporting. There's no state funding, so they have to retain some funds to be able to deal with future issues or issues that are immediate. So what we've been trying to do is work through what is a good way of allocating a $25 million reduction. First of all, one of the things that we really have to do is make sure that we don't put ourselves in this position again in the future. That in some manner, we have to be able to work out amongst ourselves that either those balances are going to be at a particular level, which make them less vulnerable, or if they're going to be at a relatively high level based on perception, then we need to work closely with the Department of Administration. We need to sit down and say, here's a balance at College X, and here's all of the elements of that. I mean, here's the commitments that are part of that. That it's not a savings account that's just got free money that can be used for anything at any time. That's a big part of what we've got to do. But on the immediate level, in terms of how we're looking at distributing the $25 million, we went through many models. We sat down and we looked at enrollments, we looked at the average of cash balances, we looked at a single cash balance at a point in time. We went through multiple different options. None of those were acceptable to everybody. None of them. In fact, usually there was some sort of a split of 50-50 or 75-25. And that really wasn't the primary goal, to get some sort of a consensus built on X number of campuses. But the idea was, what does make sense? And because the cash balances, their sizes, the amounts are so different from one institution to another, and it's not based on the size of the institution. It's not based on the operating budget. It's not based on the enrollments. It's based on a planning process that the campuses have consciously done to deal with the planning on their campus. It's not a bad thing. But when we got to the allocation strategy, what seemed most realistic was, because the cash balances are planned and they are a function of what the campuses have been doing over the last 3 or 4 years, we simply looked at it and said, you know, it's really going to be tied out as a proportional share based on the cash balance. And again, when we go through this process and we'll see the specifics in terms of the distribution adjustments, we'll see that some campuses are hit harder than others. And again, it depends on the distribution of those balances as of July. Now, what we have to do in the future is we've got to create some principles internally in terms of how we're going to deal with this, because it'll come up again. I mean, there's just no question it will come up again. And again, going back to what I said initially, not only do we have to come to some understanding amongst ourselves and try to create thresholds and what are other accounts that can be used, we need to make sure that we sit down with DOA and say, here's the damage that's being done. Here's the damage that's being done now. We went through this exercise in 2003 and 2005 as well. There was another similar kind of a reduction. And at that time, the idea was, well, we're going to get past that. We're going to work through it, and we're going to try to make some changes. Some campuses made changes, and others didn't, or were looking at different options. So that's essentially the background, what the history is, what we've got to do in the future, and the strategy that we've used to come up with the allocation.
So at this point, Tom, and you and I have obviously chatted about this. It got a little more attention probably in my part of the state than others because of the over $5 million from UW La Crosse. Chancellor Gow and I were at a community event on Monday, and the news was just coming out, and certainly in the last 48 hours attracted a lot of attention, media attention, on what UWL's commitment would be here. And I'm just trying to... The best answer we can give is we talk to, and Joe talks to people on our campus, and community asks me and others about it, is it's just a function of what's in there right now. Is that the best?
As of June 30th, the cash balance at that point in time. That's correct.
Mike, you want to follow up?
Yeah, I would like to follow up with a couple of questions. Tell me if this statement's wrong. These funds are the excess of revenue over expenses that have been allowed to accumulate over an extended period of time.
That's correct. But just with the condition that many of those dollars that sit there are earmarked for purposes moving into the next 2, 3, 4 years. They are not a free balance that's just available to be distributed. They're being saved for a purpose.
We've never seen the spending purpose of these funds, have we?
No, I don't, well, not...
When you're talking about a parking garage or this, those are capital expenditures, I think, that would come through.
Debt service. In terms of this budget, it's just the connection with the debt service.
Tom and Regent Fellow, a couple of chancellors, I think, would like to comment.
Yeah.
Chancellor Marquis, then...
Chancellor Marquis, sure.
Thank you.
Can you get up?
One comment would be that there's also a campus planning process that occurs. That residence hall, as an example, that you might speak of, is probably in the works for 5 or 6 years with the student, faculty, staff committees that have approved that building on the campus. That may not have reached the process that's up here at the state level yet, but it may be the reason why there's a $3 million cash balance, because the students and faculty and staff on that particular campus agreed with that process to build that base, so that there would be dollars in the future for that building. And that's just one example.
Chancellor Tubb.
The other thing I wanted to address, their money that students have paid to go on travel study trips, they haven't gone yet. The money's sitting there until they go. They pay before the end of the fiscal year. They go after the end of the fiscal year. Or people who have prepaid their tickets for the auditorium on campus. They're going to be going. These are monies that are committed, but they haven't been spent on June 30th. Many of them have nothing to do with an excess of revenue over expenses. It has to do with the particular date in which this happened.
Timing, that's what we're...
So then, there is a plan that we've not seen, but there's a plan at each campus for these funds.
That's right.
Of what they would be spent on and when, in every case. So it would balance out to the total of the funds.
Actually.
Is that true?
Yes.
Frida, you wanted, and then Chancellor Wells. Frida, you go first.
Also, as part of your operating budget materials that you receive every year, when there are rate increases related to room, board, for segregated fees, for any of those things, we have information in there about what those increases will be used for. So if there is a dorm that is being planned for and that causes a rate increase related to that, we will have in there that the plan is to increase the rates for a certain amount over a period of time to accumulate funds for the rooms or for a new dorm or for some new projects such as sprinklers or any of those types of things like that. So the campuses do submit some pretty detailed plans to us, and we try to encapsulate that information as much as possible. It is the fact that trying to do big projects over a long period of time with a limited number of students requires them to do those kinds of savings, and you don't expend them until you get to the point where you actually, have enough accumulated.
Chancellor Wells.
Just to give a concrete example, in 2003-05 in Oshkosh, your fund balances were a little larger. And a number of us have been here a while. Remember, we had a very good law passed in the state that we had to sprinkle our residence halls, for fire safety. So we had built an account, and we had a couple of years to do that. I forget exactly what. And then we got cut. So on one hand, we're supposed to sprinkle the residence halls, a good law, but they cut the money. We still had to sprinkle the residence halls. So, and then finally, to give a real concrete example of how much this is in flux, Oshkosh is part of its budget cut out of this $25 million is $1 million. La Crosse is $5 million. Now Oshkosh is larger than La Crosse. It's not 5 times larger. It may be 5 times better. But it's not 5 times better.
Cut him off right now. Cut him off right now. Out of order. Regent Davis, follow up on auxiliary funds.
And I know that we are all mindful, and so everybody doesn't have to say, we don't want to cut and we don't do our fair share. Everybody wants to do their fair share, recognizes that it's no one's particular fault. But this is an area that I am really, really concerned about, let's say, because it seems like what I'm hearing is, a lot of what's in these balances is are commitments that were agreed upon on the campus level and inclusive of student money, increases that were felt by the students, agreed or not, they paid them, for specific things, and then we're going to say that based on what you had and as of a certain date, you're going to have to give up more or less, depending when, and I know there's no easy answer, but it just really bothers me that the other example I thought I heard from Chancellor Gao was that, so if you do some really good planning and, and sock it away and make whatever other sacrifices, because you've got in mind what you want to do with the savings, you get whacked across the head, based on having had a good plan and having had a lot of money socked away. There's something just seems wrong with that picture to me. I don't know what the ideal answer is, but it just seems wrong. So, question I have is, are we going to hear the impact on, if there are any balances in the auxiliary revenues for each of the campuses as part of what is presented in July, so that we actually, to sort of follow up on Regent Falvo's line of questioning, we will see what the true impact, is and what's left and la 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 la.
I mean, we can certainly create that, and part of, I think, in advance of that, the thought has been that to make sure that we completely understand the issues or the positions of each of the campuses, we're going to go through, we'll sit down and go through each one of those areas, particularly where there's 2 or 3 campuses that we think, like La Crosse, have significant issues, that they're going to have to deal with commitments fairly soon and may not have the resources, or they'll be overcommitted. So what we need to do at a system level is first understand what is the real impact, and what we can do certainly as part of the discussion with the board in July is have that review of balances, looking at what were the balances, where are they going to go down to with a $25 million reduction. If that happens, maybe it still won't happen, but no, we'd be happy to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Anything more in auxiliary?
Yeah, I have one more comment.
Sure.
I'll shut up.
And then Jose, okay.
In light of the fact that you wanted some thoughts on direction, as it pertains to these auxiliary funds, I think you have to subtract any monies that are in those auxiliary funds that are not ours, that we're stewards of somebody else's money. If they're students' money or whatever that may be, that has to come off the top. And that may be one negotiating point. That I don't even think we're authorized to spend their money in a way that they gave it that wasn't intended for the purpose they gave it for. So I think that's number one.
Jose, you've been...
Yeah, we'll come back.
Let's finish up the auxiliary. We can go to other...
Similar to what Regent Falvo was just indicating, that I think that there's a certain stewardship issue that we have to be concerned about, that it's not just money that's put into those accounts that then becomes our little stash of money that we can use any nilly-willy way that we want to. And I think we need to be very mindful of being able to convey that message. And getting back to Kevin's points about the message, I think in this particular case the message is to really try to be as clear as to how these funds came to be and how they are committed. It's not just money that's sitting there. It's not that these are funds as part of an entrepreneurial account or enterprise account that's just generating all sorts of profit for the purpose of whatever usage we want to do. In terms of the messenger, I think that clearly the messenger should be not only the regents, us, but also the chancellors, but I would also encourage and even challenge the students themselves to also become part of the messengers that are trying to get back to the legislature in a positive way, not in a confrontational, but hopefully in a positive way, to try to convey again that these are not funds that are just sitting there waiting to be used for any purpose, but they really have been created with a very specific point or purpose in mind. And the final thing is just simply that I think we also need to understand that, at least my sense from what I'm hearing the discussion, these are funds that are not very easily built up. That if we're talking about off of tuition, student fees or other things, it's not as if, okay, we'll cut $100,000 and in a couple of years that $100,000 will somehow magically appear. I would assume that some of these are funds that have taken a considerable amount of time to build up. So I think we need to be careful that we don't do harm by reducing and having a false expectation that they will be built up rather quickly, and so the harm is not going to be there.
Speaking of one of the messengers, Regent Thomas wanted to...
Thank you. I've had the opportunity to talk with a couple different groups of students across the system about this particular issue of auxiliary fund spending over the past week and a half. And one group is the lacrosse delegation, and the campus student leadership is very concerned about this expenditure. I have a copy of a letter that the student leaders drafted to Senator Vineout, and my understanding is there are several other letters similar to this that went to other legislators, and also a document written by their judiciary about the context of this proposal, and 36095 students' ability to allocate these funds that they have determined some use of. And then the other forum where we talked with students was at a recent meeting last weekend at UW Green Bay, where we had student leaders from around the system, and we brought up this particular issue and had a very good conversation about how students felt about it and what we wanted to do going forward. There's absolutely a recognition that this is not an easy choice and that we're going to have to take on the burden of this payment, and that it may not be equal. But it gets much more complicated because it's being used to fund financial aid. And there are two levels to this conversation. One is the fact that students, these fees that were specifically allocated for things be used to fund financial aid, and the other is that students are funding each other's ability to attend school. And that, I know, is a big conversation that we're going to have at a larger level. But I think the students were particularly frustrated that the students at lacrosse and at certain institutions will feel the burden of this very differently than other students. For instance, a student at lacrosse who is living in the residence halls will probably see a significant fee increase in their cost of living in the hall, and perhaps that person's family makes less than $60,000 a year. Then they'll see a reduction in their cost to attend the university based on their financial aid under this provision from the governor. But then they'll also see that increase in cost to live in the dorm. So it's not a simple solution. I think people recognize that, but it's worth saying. The interesting part we took out of the conversation, I think, was a conversation that some other student leaders brought up, saying perhaps all of the students in the system should bear the cost of this $25 million equally, and then instead of having a certain number of students bear it unequally through these funds.
Anything else on... Thank you, Colleen. Anything else on auxiliaries? Regent Drew.
Just a quick question for Tom. I think we can all agree that there's a lot of unfairness built into this. What's the rationale for it coming forward in this form, in the budget?
The rationale for
doing it this way?
The rationale, do you mean the method that we chose?
No, the method that the governor chose to put in the budget this way.
Well, I mean, there's two things going on. I think first of all, he was looking for support and help to go get money to the Higher Education AIDS Board to move forward with that financial aid initiative. I think that was part of it. I can't actually say why they would have necessarily gone to the balances versus some other fund source, but I think you can see the direct connection, frankly, between that and the transfer into the Eds Board.
Regent Keene.
Thank you. And I agree. This whole concept is fundamentally unbalanced and unfair, and I think that's our message. It's not an equal treatment across the system. And I wanted to concur and agree with Regent colleague Vasquez that the best messengers are those affected, the students, the alumni, the givers, the donors, the public radio donors, the farmers across the state who will be the ones who feel the pinch of this. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Inspector?
I was just going to say that I have three quick concerns that have been raised, but I'm going to say it a little differently. One is that we're taking monies, as Mike described, or others that really are in escrow, it sounds like, and that we don't own. Second, a point that really hasn't been made, I think we are penalizing people who have saved money ahead of time. I mean, this is a little bit like I put money in my IRA for retirement, and all of a sudden the government comes along and says we're going to tax all IRAs 1% and redistribute the money to someone else. I think that is bad public policy. Not that the governor feels that way. I mean, obviously we're in terrible, strained situations, but I think we ought to find a way to differentiate some of this. Those who have put money aside on a regular basis to do something should not have to redistribute that money, I don't think, for wholly unrelated purposes.
Crane.
I wanted to say that I think it was Chancellor Martin who used the term unintended consequences to some of this, and I think that that is an appropriate kind of an approach in making our case with this, because I think we want to do this in a positive manner in order to get our message across. And I also want to say that I think that the presentations this morning have been extremely helpful to me anyway as a member of the board. And I think the board does have a significant role in where we go from. I think it was Mike Spector who spoke to this last time. And yet we need to have a coherent message in which we are all comfortable in speaking to this in ways that are persuasive. So I encourage that effort on the part of the leadership of the board as well as the administration to help prepare us for what we can do in addressing these issues. But I do think we need to do it in a positive manner in order to make our case.
All right, let's finish this up with Chancellor Gow, and then we'll get on to other subjects.
Just to clarify, Regent Fabo, segregated fees are removed. So this is a calculation once those are taken out.
Well, what about what Chancellor Telfer was talking about? Students who are putting money in to study overseas.
There is, okay, the segregated fees are out. The rest of the money comes from student fees, and we try very hard to keep those aligned with where they came from, so that housing fees are used for housing projects, dining for dining projects. I think the thing that often gets lost, particularly for the public, is we are not corporations. There are no shareholders that we are trying to maximize value and pay out dividends. We are putting all the money back into our operation to enhance the quality or maintain sometimes. So there's not a profit motive here, and I'm often puzzled when people talk about higher ed that way. The other point I want to stress, as you might imagine, we were quite dismayed to see how this shook out, and we had long conversations with lots of people here at System, and the Chancellor spoke, and this is really the only way to do this, and we are not, I want to underscore, not asking anybody to rethink the allocation. That would be very divisive, and I hope you can see that isn't going to help us if we're, there's that old divide and conquer, and you don't want to fall prey to that. I think what Regent Thomas has said is very important, that this comes at a cost. Financial aid is a wonderful thing, but there is no way to fund that taking something out of the universities without you suffer. To be very blunt and maybe oversimplistic, but there truly is no free lunch, not particularly in 2009. So that's just the point that should be made.
Regent Walsh, another subject, or this one.
I'd like to go to the big picture.
Sure, go ahead.
And before I go there, this is my fourth budget, and there's some irony here that we're talking about a raid on the auxiliary funds. I vividly recall our silence when there was a raid on the patient compensation fund, far, far more money, and it benefited us a great deal. And the raid on the transportation fund, far, far more money, and it benefited us a great deal, and we were silent. The real problem with the auxiliary fund raise is it's unfair. It's not fair to our individual kingdoms. It really isn't, and it's unfair to La Crosse. But I think that's something that we can deal with. I would rather deal with, address the big picture. And as I said, this was my fourth budget, and I look back with some irony in the fact that in 1982, I'm getting so old I can't, 2002. In 2002, it may have been, I don't know. In 2002, we had a $250 million cut. We backfilled it with $150 million worth of tuition, which incidentally was 17% raises, and we still remained below the Big Ten, at the bottom with Iowa. I mention that because that was a time that Citibank was selling at 57. This morning it was under 1. M&I Bank has lost 97% of its capital market. We know what happened in Janesville. A lot of my clients have closed down. Flower shops, big companies, Charter's about to file bankruptcy. You know, all I'd like to say is let's not lose track of what's happening in the real world. Back in 2002, it was a $2.2 billion state deficit. Today, it's a $5.7 billion state deficit. And I am told, I don't have any inside information, but I am told by DOA and DOR, because I'm suing them on something else, that we are kidding ourselves about the 5.7. It will not be 5.7. If anybody in this room thinks that sales tax and individual income has increased in the last 6 months, they've been asleep. And all I am saying is that we are in a bad, bad time. And so the issue for me isn't do we have some pain, but the issue for me is if we are going to have pain, is it fair? Now, Eddie said, let us take our share of the pain. And David said, all of us have to sacrifice. I happen to think the fact that this governor would step forward and say, I'm going to do something about the most important goal you have, and that is access to this great university system, affordability. And he stepped forward, and it's a total of $37 million, but it's $12 million new. Now, part of it's the auxiliary, but we can address that in a different way. But I think that is a huge plus. And after listening to the three chancellors, I didn't hear anything I was surprised to hear. No matter what, when you take a cut at this great system, especially after the $250 million cut, when you take an additional dollar cut, it's going to impact everybody we serve. And it's going to impact the people that serve people. You know, the guts and the core of our system is the great faculty and staff. And yes, they won't have an increase in salary, and a lot of other people in this country won't. And certainly the state employees won't. But my point is, I don't want to focus in on how bad the hurt is. What I want to do, my message would be, are we being treated fairly? Now, the auxiliary fund is kind of a cutesy one because we're not. And it has a funny impact, and it'll probably get some headlines. But that's not the big issue. The big issue is, are we being treated fairly? Is $100 million and the 1% cut, is that fair relative to the rest of the agencies in this state and the rest of the people in this state? And from what I've seen, it seems to be fair. I'm open to further messages. But when you add up the other things that this governor's given us, and I'm talking the most important thing that no other state has done, and that's reach down and to help the people who need the help the most, and that's those that earn under $60,000. And then you add in that I'm going to pay attention to your star faculty, and I'm still looking at your research. That's important. So don't get hung up about the total number unless you look at it relatively. Of course it's going to hurt everybody. And everything that was said there is true, and we're all going to have to tighten our belts. But I promise you, when you look around this economy, it's bad. And now, I want to really emphasize something, because I spend most of my professional life worrying about this problem. I spent a lot of time working with Wall Street people in the rating agencies. And I will tell you that I have never, ever seen facts like we have today. We have a 2% interest rate at a time when this country used to have 18 times earnings, revenue per earnings, EPS for companies. Today it's around 4 multiple. General Electric's sitting there at 3.6. And what's happening? It's the market telling us it's going to get a lot worse. And I don't see anything that's going to make it better. We have a freeze-up in the capital markets. There's no liquidity. Good companies can't even borrow. And so at this time in our state's history, I think we all have to have a little common sense about where we're going, because it's going to get worse. And rather than taking on the wrong people, I think what we need to do is just argue the relativity of it. And that's my message.
Brent?
Yes.
This is Tom. Can I have a question?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I guess to echo what David said, I think this is just probably the first chapter in the budget process. But could we get a further elaboration of how the budget treats the state veteran tuition program vis-a-vis the new federal GI Bill, and how realistic numbers are? Thanks.
Right. I don't have specific numbers, but I know in terms of the language change, the primary emphasis is making sure that those who are eligible are going first through the federal programs. That's a major part of it. I think the funding that we've got in place right now is sufficient. We're not seeking additional dollars.
Does that add anything on veterans? Kevin?
I just had a follow-up for Tom. If you could just discuss maybe the decrease in benefits that veterans do receive with the federal program and the Wisconsin GI Bill.
Well, I may not be the best one on the benefits specifically. I don't think they're receiving it. They're merely going through the line first to the federal programs. And then, depending on however that's working out, they can access the state funds. So I don't think there's a loss in benefits.
I don't think so.
Rita?
What the governor's budget would require is that veterans first use their post 9/11 benefits before they could access the Wisconsin benefits. And part of what they're looking at is a hold harmless provision for any veteran who might receive lesser benefits from the post 9/11 than what they would have gotten under Montgomery plus the state GI Bill. So there would not be a decrease or any loss for a veteran involved in the programs.
Libby.
I would just like to affirm what Regent Walsh just said. I think that in the K-12 system, you see every day face-to-face the impact of our economic situation. And you look at the rising homelessness. Regent Thomas told me a story of the number of homeless children in the school district of Superior. That's pervasive throughout our state, and I think that we have to rise to that level of understanding of what's really going on. And there's going to be pain everywhere, and the more we can stick together as a state education system, PK through 16, and work together to get through this to the other side, I believe that that's going to be our history-making
in action. So I fully support what Regent Walsh said.
Regent Pruitt.
Let me just follow up on Regent Burmester, because I think that was very eloquent and very important, and also note a couple things sort of from the 30,000 feet level that I think we've been talking about and around, and others have made good points about. First, this is clearly a work in progress, and I think we need to accept and appreciate the fact that there are still miles to go before we sleep in terms of the final resolution. Also, that budgets are about choices and they're about values, and I think that, to follow up on Regent Walsh's comments, I mean, I do think that these are extraordinarily difficult economic times, and the governor's proposal sort of reaffirms his long-standing commitment to higher education in the state. You see it in this financial aid proposal, which is a tremendous, I mean, in the face of states proposing double-digit tuition increases, slashing financial aid, closing campuses, furloughing workers, shutting down places. This is a budget that proposes to hold harmless, students and their families making less than $60,000 a year. I think that's a big thing, and I think it says something about values, and it says something about priorities. And I think the other aspect of this that I know everybody in this room, certainly the leadership on the campuses and the chancellors appreciate, is every time you push one lever down, another one comes up. I mean, we aren't dealing with a pool of resources that are limitless, to say the least. And so I think that we should, as in regards to President Riley's question about what our message is and what the messengers are, I think a part of our message needs to continue to be that we are really ready, willing, and able to work going forward in these difficult sorting out of what makes sense and working through the problems, but also recognizing what we have to contribute to the solution.
Anything else? Tom, we want to go back on the distribution and the stimulus discussion.
At this point, what we're going to be doing is really taking the biennial budget, as we've discussed it broadly, and starting to break it down in terms of how we can allocate it out for the next fiscal year. Again, it's derived from the information that we've received. It's preliminary. We're not actually giving a final allocation to the campuses and saying, okay, come back in July. We don't know what will happen through the process, but it's good in terms of guidance for them to create and begin to look at the total. It's not just reductions. There's other aspects to this that we've already talked about. And again, we'll be coming back to the board to act on that in July. The methodology of distribution, I think we've hit. Operating budget reduction. Okay, we've got $100 million biennial total. What we're looking at is a $65 million front-loaded. What that means is we'll take a little more out of that first year of the biennium, but what it helps in terms of going into the second year and to the following biennium is stabilize the budget. We can sort of move down, look at the second year at $35 million, and then begin to move into the next biennium. And actually that, from a financial or a budgetary standpoint, it's very beneficial. The allocations of the fees or the allocation of the dollars are based on the institution's share of the GPR fees budget. You'll find, I think it's D1, that there's a further definition. There's actually some exclusions of various units, but the basic premise is that we're using the GPR fees as the source to allocate these reductions out. And again, you'll see on the following page then the actual allocation by each of the institutions. A set of principles to support in terms of looking at, we're looking at creating as much flexibility as possible, but minimizing the impacts on student-related activities and minority and disadvantaged programs, increasing efficiency. If you can increase efficiency, you can sort of begin to see how you can limit the impacts of the reductions, considering one-time reductions, and as we've already said, anticipating some slowing of the growth agenda initiatives. And the actual allocation reductions would be as follows, again, based on that GPR fee proportional share. That's the 100 million piece translated into 65 million. This is that 20.4 million.
We're looking at a biennial total of 20.4. The first year, we're just going to spread that out. It's across the board equally between the 2 years. And again, it's based on a proportional share of the appropriation total of the institution. And again, this methodology is typical. I mean, this is the way it's typically done. So that's not new. Here is the 1% across the board allocation. The items that you see at the bottom, the ALP, utilities, student aid, those would be allocated once we know the specific allocations will be allocated out to the campuses later. Recruitment and retention, talked about a $15 million program. The first year, we're looking at $5 million allocation. And again, supporting the competitive compensation for faculty, instructional academic staff, research academic staff. And you can see the methodology. Again, it's based on payroll base for those categories of employees. Here's the distribution of the $5 million. There's some other relatively minor changes. Again, we had talked about this a little earlier on the Lawton undergraduate minority retention program, the advanced opportunity program, utilities, student tech fees, student aid. These are, as it says, formula re-estimated changes. These are changed automatically based on specific formulas that exist for the programs. And we also talked about the Wisconsin Institutes for Discovery and the Genomics Initiative. Those are out of state GPR dollars, and the Biofuels Initiative is out of segregated funds, which is it's out of a state renewable energy fund. We've discussed it at some level already, but the $14.27 million is the 1% across the board cut allocation for program fees. It's not, we've done GPR. Today you're really looking at an allocation of the program, of the GPR fees, which is what we've looked at. But we thought for informational purposes, and because there's a good deal of interest on this, we would also go through the allocation of those other revenues that we talked about in terms of, we've got a $28 million, $28+ million commitment on the across the board cut for program fees. This is how we're looking at $14.27 million in the first year, 2009 and 10. We see here, including gift, trust, various, those again are being negotiated. We're still in the process of trying to work that out with DOA, but as of right now, the amount is correct. And then the $25 million transfer that I mentioned earlier, and that relates to the auxiliary services. Those two combined, $25 million plus the $14 million, give you that allocation as it relates to each of the campuses, the $39.3 million. And again, the allocation, not to belabor this, and in terms of the $25 million was based on a cash balance at a point in time.
Regent Welch. Question. You said 65-35. Was that the proposal or was that the negotiation?
That was, well, we had talked about that originally going into it.
Could we do better? Could we do 70-30?
I don't know that we could support that. I think that's part of an issue that we would have in terms of...
But it'd be better for us if we did.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the lower you can get going into the second year, the better it is going into the next biennium. It's to what level the campuses could sustain the cut in the first year. That's the issue.
Well, no, right. But so you think you've stretched it as far as you can to go to 65?
I mean, we haven't gotten anything finalized yet, and if we can do that, we'll certainly approach that.
It really helps.
Oh yeah, no, I agree.
I have a question on the utilities. I think every year in finance we're over in utilities, and we have to search for another $1 million to $4 million. If I remember last year, how do you get utilities?
Well, I mean, this is an interesting year because we actually are budgeting fewer dollars in utilities. I mean, there's actually, when you looked at that cost to continue, the only increase in facilities was for new space. But that was actually offset by a reduction in the estimated costs of utilities over the next few years, which obviously can change a lot, but that's part of the allocation and formula-based approach that DOA takes in developing that information.
I just want to, for the record, commend Tom and the message that I'm hearing from Kevin also and others that we are in negotiations. I think that it's really important that we recognize that the enemy is not, there is none. I mean, it is a terrible, terrible set of circumstances, and I appreciate the fact that we're hearing that there's an openness and an open door between our system and DOA and the governor. And I think that that's an important, positive development, not that it's a surprise, but I just think we ought to recognize it. So I appreciate that that's the approach we're taking.
Anything else, Tom? The resolution that we are the committee is being asked to approve would be the graph on D1.
You're looking at, I don't have it would be the $5 million, the 1%, and the operating reduction. So they're looking at three different, because they're all GPR.
Oh, okay.
It'd be all of them except the program revenue?
That's correct.
Okay. So that is the resolution to approve what would be this is from the Business Finance and Audit on the distributions put forth on D1, D2, and D3. Is there a motion to approve that? It has to be from somebody in the committee. There you go. I listen. That's good. Excluding the PR, right. Regent Felbo, you're going to second that, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
I knew you were. All in favor? By the committee. All say aye.
Aye.
Opposed. Now on the stimulus, Tom.
This is very brief. Highly interactive process going on right now in terms of interactions with people, federal government, what they're doing, how they're doing it, and sort of the status. There is a system task force that is set up right now, largely a clearinghouse for information. We meet weekly with a number of people throughout the campuses. We talk about what they're doing. The main emphasis is the broadband access, infrastructure, financial aid, research, and energy. Those are sort of key areas. But in truth, there's many, many other areas that we're looking at, or connections and networking that we're doing right now. And a big part of this, we talk about colleagues on campuses, but there's also the partnerships. There's a number of faculty, there's both in research on a number of the different areas that are talking with other people both within Wisconsin and outside of Wisconsin, where they might be able to collaborate on grants and programs that they're not dollars coming into Wisconsin, they're dollars that exist out in the kind of the competitive environment. And it's an interesting process in terms of trying to get one's arms around all of the pieces of it. We're looking at $3,720 million coming in as our stimulus total. I know at least $1.2 billion of that is connected with the state budget, that's part of an offset for the Medicaid costs, so it's part of filling that hole that's been discussed. And I know there's other stabilization dollars, but not sure of those amounts. But I think a big part of this is the additional funds that are available through NIH, NSF, through NASA Energy. We've been involved in a number of different discussions at the federal level with the progress of what's happening at each of these institutions or agencies. Is they're creating guidelines for many subsets of programs, grants. Some of the money is actually just distributed on the basis of an existing formula, or they're using existing proposals and providing funding in that fashion. But others are creating new proposals. Those proposals go to OMB, who in turn then gives some sort of guidance as to the structuring, which is part of, right now, we don't have absolute information on all of those grants and what may be available. But we think within the next 2 weeks, we're going to have about as much information as we can get to try to really make that connection between our networking and the funding that's out there. We do know, and talked a little bit about this, there have been increases in Pell Grants. Work study's gone up 20%, American Opportunity Tax Credit, and infrastructure. Infrastructure has both internal, within the state, and external opportunities. There will be funds that we may be able to access externally for infrastructure, and internally I think there's still a lot of discussions as to what higher ed may be able to get out of the state funds. And lastly, kind of going back to the discussion on OMB, there's going to be a lot of reporting. The idea that this is out there generally for job creation, many of the pieces of the expectation is that we can define that in a fairly finite way. So when this goes back to through the process to OMB, they're defining what that means. That will then come out as part of the grant program. And we'll just be continuing to get information through the federal agencies, and there's a very, very active set of or group of individuals through the Office of Recovery and Reinvestment that are working on this. Andy Richards is the representative for the system, and I know they're meeting quite regularly. That's sort of the status. There's probably a lot more to say, but there's really not a lot of finality at this point on the programs.
Questions for Tom? Is there a motion to adjourn by a member of the Business, Finance, and Audit Committee? Yeah, good. Eileen, in a second. All in favor from that committee, say I have adjourned. Aye. Well, we're going to have a brief Regent meeting now before lunch that President Bradley will preside over, and then we'll do lunch, and then we'll come back for the diversity discussion. President Bradley.
Good, thank you. We will now start an 8-minute Board of Regent meeting. Would the Secretary please call the roll? Here.
Here. Here. Here. Here. Here.
One night they slid to $60
million.
Here.
Without even talking.
Here.
Regent Pruitt.
Here.
Regent Smith.
Here.
Regent Spencer.
Here.
Regent Thomas.
Here.
Regent Voskett.
Here.
Regent Walsh.
Here.
Regent Gomez.
Here.
Quorum is present.
Good, thank you very much. You've received the minutes from our last meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second? Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. As far as all opposed, a motion carries. Thank you. President Riley gave his remarks this morning, and my only remark in terms of...
Could I be recorded as president? This is Tom.
Yes.
Yes, you are. Thank you, Regent Loftus.
All right, thank you.
My only report is that we have continued, the board leadership and Kevin has continued to meet with members of the legislature, and we will continue that going forward from today, and you can guess what the subject will be. I now call upon Regent Smith as chair of the Business, Finance, and Audit Committee to give a report.
We had one main item this morning that we had. That was a contract agreement between UW-Madison and GlaxoSmithKline for Data Analysis Research Center. Total is $1,980,000 over the next 5.5 years. We approved that. So, on behalf of the committee, I'm going to move adoption of Resolution 12A1, which is the UW-Madison contractual agreement with GlaxoSmithKline, and of course the resolution we just passed with all of us here, 12E, the 2009-10 budget distribution adjustments for UW system GPR fee funds.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Or is there a request to remove either item from the consent agenda? Okay, is there any discussion on the motion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
That's it.
Thank you very much, Regent Smith. And now I'd ask Regent Bartel to give us a report from the Capital Planning and Budget Committee.
Thank you, President Bradley. The committee met this morning and approved 3 resolutions, which in most circumstances would be presented as a consent agenda. I'm going to take just the first 2, which are fairly routine, and then spend a little time describing the third one. The third one has to do with the capital plan budgeting, designing, and constructing buildings and facilities. The process by which we do this is the committee, as you know, has been working on a streamlining and flexibility system, and I'd like to present that separately. But first, Resolution 1.3.B requests authority to adjust the $12.4 million budget of the UW-Madison Chadburn and Barnard Hall renovation projects by $1.4 million. Total project remains less than its enumeration of $14.7 million. This is, by the way, this procedure for this project is just one of many examples of why we need to deal with the streamlining process, which I'll describe in a moment. The second resolution that I want to present as part of the consent agenda is Resolution 1.3C from UW Parkside, seeking authority to convey a couple of very small parcels of land consisting of less than 0.3 acres to Kenosha County for the purpose of constructing a roundabout intersection on the campus that the campus wants and that Kenosha is happy to receive and maintain. So the committee adopted those resolutions unanimously, and I'll present them as a consent resolution.
Okay, is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Is there a request to remove any item from the consent agenda? If not, any discussion on the motion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
The third resolution, 1.3.D, recommends statutory revisions as part of the capital budget for streamlining the capital planning and budgeting process. The current process, I think we all agree, is out of date, it is inefficient, it is time-consuming, and it costs more. And these are things that should be dealt with. The revisions comprise three individual items. First, increasing the statutory thresholds that trigger various levels of approval. Secondly, allowing agencies to control project costs by managing the total amount of capital funds expended rather than enumerating rough and usually, but almost always, inaccurate estimates for project budgets for each project. And third, modernizing the project delivery methods to conform to modern business practices, which has the effect of controlling costs and saving time. And I'm going to ask Associate Vice President David Miller to present these in a little more detail and with some... he's not going to do that. PowerPoint's not here.
Regent Bartel, Mr. Giroux and I did create the PowerPoints as you asked, but this computer is apparently not connected to the network to pull them up.
Okay.
Looking at your materials, very briefly, behind Resolution D, under the Capital Planning and Budget Committee. All right. Behind the executive summary, the third page titled Specific Statutory Recommendations, number 1, as Regent Bartel referenced, is increasing by relative inflationary amounts the thresholds by which projects are required to go through certain approvals, whether it's the full legislature or merely the Board of Regents and the Building Commission. So this maintains the existing structure, but raises the thresholds for which projects have to go through the process. One exception, it would remove entirely gift-funded projects from the state enumeration process, that is, approval by the full legislature, and allow the Building Commission to authorize those entirely gift-funded projects when they are ready to proceed, saving a year to 2 years off the life of the project. The second item is recommending to change the way the state enumerates projects, and that is, rather than enumerating, putting in the statutes a specific dollar amount for a project by title based on a very, very preliminary budget estimate prior to design, authorizing each agency a maximum amount of capital funding based on our project request, and when the project is designed, to the design report of 35%, which is required approval by the agency and the Building Commission, then fixing the budget, and then accessing your total amount of borrowing rather than fixing it for each project. We think this will arrive at much better budgeting for each project and ultimately save money on each project and potentially completing more projects in a given biennium. The third, as Regent Bartel mentioned, is the way in which projects are delivered. The statutes require a process that is quite cumbersome, leads to confusion on the job site day in and day out about management of that project, and makes it very difficult for the state to implement any accountability for that project among the various contractors who all operate under separate contracts with the state as opposed to one unified contract. There are multiple ways in which a project can be delivered. We certainly won't talk about those, but say that our recommendation is that the statutes be changed to allow the agency requesting the project to request the appropriate delivery method for that particular project, and then allow the Division of State Facilities to concur or recommend and implement a different method, but to get those connected. So those are the requests. We're going to show a slide that uses two residence hall projects that were constructed in the exact same time period at Platteville and La Crosse, one by an expedited manner that ended up being 2 years shorter in process, the exact same construction method, both built 380 beds. At Platteville, we have 2 baths per 4-bedroom suite. At La Crosse, we have 1 bath for 4-bedroom suite, and we saved $3 million in the Platteville experiment, if you will, resulting in significant savings in fees for students living there. So those are the recommendations. Thank you.
This is a complicated subject, and we thought the visuals would help illuminate it. This is a design of the La Crosse and Platteville projects, and it graphically shows how the process that was used in Platteville was much more efficient than the process that was used in La Crosse. And it got 2 years off of it and came in with a better project. Not that the La Crosse project was bad in any sense. Anyway, we think these are very important changes. We are taking this opportunity to suggest these changes as part of the capital budget, and we recommend and hope that you will concur in Resolution 1.3.D. I'll move that.
Is there a second? Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
That ends my report, Mr. President.
Okay. Thank you, Regent Bartel. Before we adjourn, could I just take a couple of seconds of your time? I'd like to introduce one of the 173,000 reasons why our work is very important. Chase, would you please stand? Totally unexpected. I'd like to introduce you to Chase Borick, who is a student at UW Marathon. He is the president of the Association of Student Governments for all of the UW colleges. He's serving an internship with our firm this semester, so I work very closely with him. He's a very clear thinker. He's an excellent writer. And I know that Chancellor David Wilson is very proud of Chase and the other students who do work like he does. Am I right, Chancellor Wilson? So, please welcome Chase Borick. I don't know if he's going to be an attorney.
Clear thinker.
He is also... He is also a veteran of the Iraq War and came back after serving our country and decided that he was going to pursue an excellent education in the UW system.
Could I add? Chase is also the president of the Know How to Go Club at UW Marathon.
Right. And in his spare time, he studies. May I have a motion to adjourn? Second? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? We are adjourned. And we will resume at 1 o'clock.
So in essence, we agree